Imagine, if you will, a world where people not only do such things as lead to death, but they applaud others who do them. Now, of course, that is the close of Romans chapter 1 there in verse 32. But go ahead and cue the Twilight Zone music. Today, I want to talk about something which came to my attention here in the last week. And, well, it's something which is rather petty. It's not actually that big of a deal in the larger scheme of things. And if you just carve it out and just isolate this one thing, it's not that big of a deal. But if you put it in the context of life, you actually understand that we're living beings and things don't just appear out of nowhere. Suddenly, this becomes a very significant sign of the time that is a product of a lot of other just desecration and destruction all the way around us. And also the indignity that they want you to have out there as an individual. And I think it ties into Romans chapter 1 because it is the applauding at the destruction. So it came to my attention here recently that at McDonald's, one can now go and buy an adult Happy Meal. And now this is something which is targeted towards adults. And it comes with a toy. And when you think of an adult toy in an adult Happy Meal, of course, you hear that language and you think of something that is, sexual and filthy and degenerate in that way. But instead, this is actually just some little, stuffed or a rubber animal or something to that effect. But it is, in fact, as bad and as destructive as if it is one of those more licentious and X-rated things. Because what this means is our society does not want you to have the dignity of being an adult. There was a survey that was done recently of young men. And again, I'm 31. Most people my age are not married. And they were asking the young men, and something like 44% of young men did not want to ask a young girl out, a young lady out, because they knew it would be construed as sexual harassment. And, that's a horrific number. And I'm a pastor of a congregation. I've got a lot of age ranges at the church. We're actually very dynamic. We've got a lot of different ages going on. And I have some people in the church that are older. It's an older family. And by that, I mean, there's a husband and wife that are married, and the wife's brother is also attending. They're in their 80s. And back when they were teenagers, the brother used to chaperone his sister and her boyfriend at the time. And he was even the witness at their wedding when they ran away and eloped. And we're supposed to look at that situation where you've got a chaperone watching two young people date. And you're supposed to mock that and scorn that. To think that that's very low. That's what the fundamentalists do. That's what the ignorant people do that are backwards. But the truth of the matter is the life that they had back then was much more fulfilling. It was much closer to understanding that God made a creation that would have a lot of hardship in it. And I want to get to hardship here in a little bit. Because I think a lot of these conversations go around to how we as a people try to deal with hardship. And we've bought into this utopian idea that you can just play with the moral code of everything as if it's an a la carte menu. You pick out your appetizer and say, well, this is the moral boundary for me, and this is where I want to go. And none of that's the case. Sins are not bad because of some cultural construct, and I would actually say a lot of the historical criticism that we do is actually many times well-intended, but actually useless, is actually dealing with the real question of belief and dealing with the fact that the real people in the world, they reject what is good and true because they're sinners, and we want to be lords of our own lives. We want to have all the answers. But kind of going back to the whole marriage thing, we have, in an attempt to have a more equitable society, that's the word that is used for this, we have come and we've played with the formula of how young men and young women relate to one another. And what's happened is everybody is unhappy. Again, like I said, I'm 30. I know a lot of men my age. I know a lot of young ladies my age. A lot of people who bought into that lie of, you don't need to go off and have married. That's not a fulfilling thing. You can have a career, which is ridiculous and materialistic on its face. Like the idea that more important than bringing a child into this world, you should go instead work, say at a factory or a desk job, or even go and become a CEO. If I ask you right now, who is the CEO of General Motors in 1974, you probably can't tell me. But you can probably tell me your grandmother's name. You may not even be able to tell me the name of your great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, but you do know that you had one. And we've got this kind of twisted idea that the materialistic bent on reality is actually more fulfilling than the things which God has designed, and it's just not true. And so what happens is young people, they grow up, they're not happy. There is a lot of holes in life. In George Orwell's Animal Farm, and I highly encourage you to go out and read Animal Farm. You can read it very quickly. You can listen to an audiobook version of that in just a few hours. It's a very, very short work. But the old donkey who watches the decline and spiral of society into utter hell makes the observation and statement that says, things were bad before, they're bad now. Me bringing the Declaration of Independence into this, Thomas Jefferson writes, people are likely to suffer sufferings while they're bearable. They're more prone to suffer while sufferings are bearable than they are to fight against that. But we often read that line and forget that a lot of times we exchange one suffering for something worse. And old Benjamin, the donkey in Animal Farm, he makes the statement that the constants of life are three things: hunger, hardship, and disappointment. And you know what? The donkey's actually true. He's correct on this. The question we have in this fallen world is, what are you going to do about that? What are you going to do about that? And the solutions of the world are move downward, stay in the pit, don't aspire, give in to your base natures. That's what Romans 1 is largely about. Yes, it is filled with a lot of, exchanging truth for a lie, embracing things that are sexually deviant, walking away from how God designed men and women to be. And there is a lot of that goes on in Romans 1 because that is all a downward pursuit. It's always things that give into the base nature. They're things which give us a depressed instinct. We don't aspire. We don't believe. It's actually a lot easier to be a pessimist who assumes the worst version of a situation than it is to be someone who is a believer. They say one of the great divides between, say, Christianity and the kind of progressivism of the world, like real true Christianity, is the question of whether or not people are basically good. And you get a lot of, false teachings and perversions that aren't really true Christianity, that teach that you don't need a savior, that people are basically good, that sin is just a cultural phenomenon. It was offensive to do these deeds back then, but maybe not now. God is on the move. Insert heresy here. They're all corrupt, and they all leave people in the pit. They're actually very sad. It's very sad that McDonald's thinks so small of you that you as an adult should have an adult Happy Meal and be enjoyed by that. It's very pitiful that a pastor might think so small of you that you don't need to rise above your sin and become someone better. It's horrific that our world has, again, selling people something that would be more equitable, which has made exactly no one happier, except for the devil and his demons in hell. That we could toy with the formula, something which was far beyond our control. Again, this is what you get in 1 Timothy 1, where Paul writes about there are teachers who want to be teachers of the law, but they don't really understand the law. And they don't even understand the things they affirm. Like, it's very popular right now to say that God is genderless. People don't even understand what they're saying. That is an utter heresy. First of all, Jesus is fully God, fully man. Unless you can answer me when Jesus stopped being fully God, fully man, then that is heresy, because the word is less. You might say that there's something mysterious about God. He's more than us. We know there's God the Father that's revealed to us there. As the Father, there's God the Son, who is revealed to us and fully man in that sense. But then we don't, the Holy Spirit, there's a lot of mystery there. If you want to say there's mystery to it, that's one thing. But that's not actually a synonym. It's not a analog. It's not a corollary with saying God is genderless. Those are very different concepts. And affirming that actually sets up a society where men and women, they don't understand that there are certain callings that are inherent and indicative of being a man, and there are certain callings that are inherently virtuous and indicative of being a woman. And these things, they do come together in sort of a complement. That's complement with an E, not an I. Though if you are virtuous people, it will turn into that complement with an I. Compliment with an E means to complete. Compliment with an I means to say something, very, very polite and edifying to someone else, to say something which is very nice of them. And in our world, young people have been given a situation of hardship. We who have been stewards of the truth in the church, we've been a lot more concerned with looking like model citizens for the rest of the world than we have been actually obeying God's word. And those two things, you can't have both. You can't have the world saying, look at this model citizen over here, and then also hear the Lord, God who made all heaven and earth, to say, look, here's my good and faithful servant. If you want to hear, well done, my good and faithful servant, you're probably not going to be given many compliments by the world. We live in an hour of deliberate untruth. And the McDonald's Happy Meal for adults is something that I think is not necessarily the product of like a cabal of witches who all got together, though I do think they're all cabals of witches. I think we actually need to pay more attention to the occult and things of that nature, though. It's a very, very dangerous thing to observe. I think the McDonald's Happy Meal is a product of instinct, where you've got in a corporation like McDonald's who looks over there and they say, look at all these young adults. They're made immature. They have no indignity. Now, we don't think that because we're debased. We're Romans 1. We're given over to our depraved selves. We're Pharaoh in Egypt who's hardened his heart. And, from reading Paul in the New Testament, I really think the Old Testament notion of hardening the heart and the New Testament notion of giving over to your depraved mind is the same concept. God just says, look, I'm not going to force your will, but you wanted to be a tyrant. You wanted to be a sexual deviant. I'm going to remove my hand of grace and just let you enjoy it. You no longer have a conscience. Conscience meaning with. You're with something larger than self. Con is the first part of that Latin root there. You're no longer tethered to that greater grace of God, and God pulls his hands out so your heart can just be hard, enjoy it. You wanted the deviancy where you couldn't tell the truth between man and pig, and go for it. McDonald's looked at the world and said, okay, we're not aspiring anymore. The hardship is present. And people aren't mixing the hardship with the blood of the Lamb, which will make it for a very beautiful stained glass window. You go and you look at the great stories, the great history set before us, and hardship mixed with the blood of the Lamb makes for a very beautiful painting. But rather than us having that aspirational answer to the hardship, we've instead said, well, I'm just going to stay at home. I'm going to have my PlayStation. I'm just going to live on a mattress and play the PlayStation. Maybe have some pornography whenever the moment arises. And the world looked at that and said, okay, we're going to clap at that. We're going to actually meet them where they're at and keep them there. We're going to go applaud them and market to them the adult Happy Meal because that's really all they deserve. This is a marketable thing to this generation because they're so undignified. They're so kept in their infancy that they're going to like this. It is the Twilight Zone. We live in the Twilight Zone. And the same evil, the same spirit of the age that we might see corrupting everything around us is present in that. It's an applaud for it. So what are you going to do? What do we actually do about the hardship? How do we overcome something like this? One of the things that we've got to realize is that walking with God, it's a precious thing. It's a mysterious thing. And it's not a formulaic thing, though it oftentimes involves a lot of formulas and behaviors. I think about the fourth commandment to honor the Sabbath and keep it holy. That is a behavior before it is a kind of internal, emotional reaction. Like it's actually, you will schedule your whole week around having this one thing be holy. That's a behavior first and foremost. And it does influence us beyond that, but it begins with some level of instinctive and organized obedience to God. And with that being said, it's not just a raw formula because we aren't made to serve the Sabbath. For that point as well, we're not made to serve a worldly government. If we're not made to serve the things which God has declared good and holy, you can bet your, insert thing that you would bet here that we're not made to serve the government. We might give something its due, that it's honor, but not anything more than that. To really walk with God, and to actually overcome the hardship, I always go to Ecclesiastes. And my favorite verse in that whole book is Ecclesiastes 3:10, which says, I have seen the travail, which God has given to the sons of Adam to be exercised thereon. Ecclesiastes 3:11 then goes on to say, God has made everything beautiful in its time. He's even placed the great mystery in the hearts of men, but yet they don't really understand it. And that's kind of where we are. God has set the great mystery before us. There is hardship that we can respond and answer on. But we have to be moving upwards. I love how John Adams, he writes to his grandson saying, be worthy and excellent in everything that you do. Excel in everything worthy. Increase in everything worthy. Advance in everything worthy. And I would rather you be, a low-ranking officer who has his stuff together than an admiral or a captain who's corrupt. I'd rather you be just a lawyer in a small town who is honest and fair than to be a great judge or magistrate who is given over to politics and evil and corruption and lying tongue and couching and faking your personality and coming to the situation and wondering to yourself, how do I say this and make this feel right, as opposed to actually being a man of truth. He says, I'd rather you be the pastor of a small country parish than to be an archbishop who simply does whatever he thinks the hour needs him to do, in the sense that he's trying to posture himself and position himself that everything has a certain appearance and feel to it. Be someone who knows what the first things are. Understand that a football is a football, that a virtue is a virtue, that a sacrifice is a sacrifice. And when it comes to actually doing the things of life, caring about the things that really matter first, and letting the other things, the opinions, what people react, all that stuff, let it fall to the side, because you can't be ruled by the whimsies of sin. You have to pursue the virtues first and not try to appease the sinful state of things. John Adams, he makes the statement to another one of his grandchildren, his granddaughter, saying, do justly, love mercy, walk humbly. This is enough for you to know and to do. The world is a better one than you deserve. And one of the things which I really find myself loving John Adams, we just come off of Columbus Day. There's a lot of people who don't even understand what they're saying. There's a lot of people in the church who don't want to actually take up for the American heritage. They think they're somehow being noble by pursuing some sort of globalist agenda, which is indeed giving things over to evil. They're not able to think through. A lot of these people are well-intended, but they're also very soft-headed and weak. And I don't mean weak in the sense that they're low and humble. I mean weak in the sense that they're cowardly, that it's actually crossed into that thing that is called out in Revelation 21:8. Revelation 21:8 puts the cowards there with the fornicators and murderers. It's a very, very bad thing. But this idea that if we can just reject our heritage, dishonor the past, dishonor our parents, dishonor everything which came before us, that somehow we could move forwards. Which again, a part of that is based on the fact that there are sins in the past. There's hardship in the world. What are you going to do about that? That's a very serious question. God comes to us and says, no, you actually honor the past, and if there's sin in the past, you have to overcome that. If your parents have done you wrong, your ancestors have done you wrong, you being spiteful towards that's only going to corrupt you. Don't wait for an apology from them. It's not going to come. Instead, you have to learn to forgive, which is not an easy thing. It's actually very, very expensive. It's very taxing on the soul. For God to forgive, he had to come down from heaven, become man, walk, bleed, die, and then with all power of life, break forth from the empty tomb. And that wasn't an easy thing. So why would you think it would be easy in your life to forgive something? Especially when it's your ancestors. I mean, the people who in some small way you're made in your parents' image as much as you are in God's. Now, again, not in the grand scheme. In the grand scheme of things, you're ultimately made in the image of God, and that's a much higher thing. But on a very small scale, you look in the mirror, you've got some of your parents' features, things of that nature. They are the ones who make up your biology. And if you're at war with that, you're always going to be at war with yourself too. God says, no, if those people have been sinful, you still bring honor to them, and you be the best you can be so that you are honoring that bloodline. That's what we're called to do. But the world tells us to afflict our heritage, to afflict Christopher Columbus, which again, most people know very little about Christopher Columbus. I could rattle on about some statistics and numbers about, his three little ships, the tonnage of the caravels and things of that nature, and the bickering back and forth between the kingdoms. I don't know Christopher Columbus quite like I do John Adams, so, I almost would feel awkward about doing that. But when you look at these people in the past, no one in the church really wants to defend our heritage, but they rather want to destroy it, to trample it underfoot and disregard it and write it off as some, political whim that is selfish. Again, we a lot of times associate freedom and rights with selfishness, even though most people who use that language don't even understand what they are. rights are not really anything. They're not entitlements in the sense that I'm entitled to not have to listen to this from my neighbor. Rights that we have actually in America are actually summed up in the Bill of Rights, really, which is the first 10 amendments. And they're actually things that the government can't do to you. It has very little to do with what's going on between you and your neighbors. But when it comes to the suffering of the world, you look at someone like John Adams, and he understood that everything in life actually matters quite a bit. John Adams, he has another letter. No, excuse me, it's an entry in his diary, where in 1779, he's on a ship, and I believe they're off the coast of New York, and he kind of finds himself obsessed with the ongoings on that ship. Now, again, John Adams is quite a famous man involved in the American Revolution, and they're in the middle of that. But he finds himself concerned with the kind of just the atmosphere of the ship, because the captain, who is a man who is very stern when he's stern, but occasionally he's not very stern in his word, which is a bad thing militaristically. But then there are some competing factions within the crew, some different cliques of people that are bidding for the I almost said the pastor, but the captain's favor. There's some people that are wanting to play favorites, even though the captain's not very interested in this. And kind of you got two factions of the crew that are going at war with one another, and one particular man who's kind of lazy. He doesn't do anything more than what he's expected to, but yet he thinks that he can get the most favoritism from the captain. It's a very corrupt thing. And John Adams, he looks at this situation, and he's trying to figure out how this can be solved. He's a famous man. He's famous for, again, teaching discipline in everything that you do. He's not someone who actually wants to be involved in politics, but he knows if righteous men don't do it, wicked men will. So John Adams is there, and he has this great reputation. And so all the sailors on this ship, they've, stiffened their spines. They're a little bit more disciplined that he's on there. But he knows that the moment that he leaves, this is going to go right back to disarray, and you're going to have these competing factions at war on the ship. And John Adams looks at this as a case study, because, again, this is all of life. People do this in their families. People do this as nations. We do this everywhere we go. If we can't sort out the factions on a ship, then we're not going to be able to sort out the factions on a nation. And so, there's conversations that he has with the captain. He knows it is bad to play the favoritism stuff. It's bad to give in to any of that. But he also is very worried that the captain isn't willing to be as strict with his word as he needs to be. Because it's not actually a cruel thing to be strict and tell people the truth. To draw hard lines is not a cruel thing. It's not a cruel thing to construct a bridge over a crocodile-infested pool, and to tell a child, you walk on the bridge, you're not going and playing in the pool. But we as a society, we've decided not to do that. We've actually said, what if the bridge is bad? That those old restraints, that fence we put around the crocodile-infested moat was actually a bad thing, and we should tear that down. And if people, they consent to wanting to go down into that crocodile-infested moat, we should encourage them to do that. And when they're down there and they're unhappy, we'll give them an adult Happy Meal, and maybe they'll feel consoled because they've got a little rubber toy as an adult. And it's wicked. But John Adams is right. You've got to actually put everything together. The ship, it has to have its course corrected. Now, sadly, his diary entry doesn't give any conclusion to that. He leaves the ship before there's any sort of resolution thereon. But he was very concerned with it, and he was very correct to be. Because the hardship in life, it has to be met head on. You have to meet it with gratitude. You have to meet it with upward aspirations, not just the downward pursuits. The prepositions in life matter. Go up. You need to become someone whom the demons sweat. You need to be someone of faith. You need to be excellent in everything that is worthy, someone who walks in the truth. You're girded with honor, someone who is clean, attractive, and aspiring for a godly report of all of your works. Those are the things that we need to do if you want to be mature and adult. The world doesn't think you deserve to be treated like an adult, and it's going to clap for you being a child like you're just a character in the Twilight Zone. So thank you for joining me. I'm Pastor J. Dylan Proctor. I know this has just been a little bit of a, conversation thrown here and there. I haven't had a lot of feedback in recent months of people from online. I do like to hear from people, just because I want to make sure that I'm not just speaking out into the void. I like it when people reach out to me and talk with me. So if you are listening to this, please do give me a comment. I've been a little worried lately that I haven't had a lot of people checking into stuff, so it wasn't, something that was worth giving my time to. And then I actually had an older gentleman at church come and say, hey, why haven't you been putting things online? I've been missing you. So I realized that I do need to put stuff out there. But I greatly appreciate you communicating with me. And if there's other things that you want discussed, other books, reference Animal Farms, you want to hear more of an in-depth look at that George Orwell novel, whatever it is, just reach out to me. I love to hear from people. And if anybody wants to rebuke, if I'm going to be talking about things, I'm big enough to take rebukes. I know I joke about the pitchforks, but send them. I want to know where we're at, because I want us all to be fortified for the hour and day in which we live. And I make mistakes. I overlook things. Sometimes I handle and speak poorly. But we have to reason with one another, have a honest and sincere interest in the truth, and be willing to go where God takes us. So with that, thank you for joining me. God love you, and have a blessed day.